Think of a time you walked away from a conversation feeling like something was off, but you couldn't quite explain what. The person was polite, even charming. They didn't say anything obviously wrong, but inside there was this small, uncomfortable feeling that you'd just been quietly steered somewhere you never meant to go. That's not paranoia. That's your brain noticing something faster than you could consciously process it. Maybe it was a new acquaintance who started calling you one of the special ones way too fast. Maybe it was a coworker, and after talking to them you realized you'd somehow agreed to take on their work, even though you walked into that conversation planning to say no. Maybe it was a partner who's so good at flipping any argument that 10 minutes in, you're the one apologizing, even though you started the conversation with a legitimate complaint about them. Psychologists call this thin slicing. The brain's ability to pick up on a behavioral pattern in a matter of seconds, long before the rational part of your mind can gather actual evidence. The problem is, most people don't trust that signal. We learn to talk ourselves out of it with, "I'm probably imagining it." And that's the exact moment a manipulator gets in. Most channels about influence psychology on this platform teach you how to spot other people's weaknesses and use them. This video works the opposite way. It's about noticing when someone is already using yours, early enough that you can still stop it before it costs you real time, money, or trust in your own judgment. Today we're going to train that signal. 7 specific, checkable signs that a manipulator almost always shows in the first few minutes of meeting someone or in the first few seconds of a conflict, if you know where to look.
This isn't a be suspicious of everyone list. It's a checklist you can run quietly in your head in the middle of an ordinary conversation. Most videos in this space, and from many other creators on this topic, teach you how to go on offense, how to become calculating, untouchable, dangerous yourself. Today is the opposite. This video is about not being the person other people's tactics get practiced on. That's not a lesser skill. Statistically, it's a far more practical one. Research on financial fraud consistently shows that victims of manipulative schemes aren't the most gullible or naive people. More often, they're smart, busy people who are used to making fast decisions, exactly the group with the least time to stop and notice inconsistencies. The good news is that spotting manipulation is a trainable skill, not an innate talent. Like a musician's ear. At first you can't hear a note that's slightly off, and after a month of practice, it cuts right through. This works the same way. After this video, you won't be reading minds, but you will start noticing concrete, physically observable patterns that used to slip right past you. There's one more reason to train this now rather than later. Fraud and social engineering specialists point out that successful manipulators and con artists rarely rely on one big dramatic move. Far more often, they run a series of small actions, each one too minor on its own to set off any alarm. The problem is that the human brain is bad at adding up coincidences. We easily forgive one weird moment, then forget to connect it to another weird moment a week later. Manipulation almost never gets caught on one damning frame. It gets caught in the sum of small things that each looked harmless by themselves. That's exactly why today's list isn't a random set of tips, it's a system. 7 checkpoints to watch at the same time, so the sum becomes visible before real damage piles up. Here's a typical composite example. Someone meets a new business partner. First meeting, forced closeness. You and I clearly see business the same way. That's rare these days. A week later, a small boundary test. Promised documents show up late. No explanation. 2 weeks after that, artificial urgency. We need a decision today or we lose the window. On its own, each of those 3 moments is easy to explain away as normal business chaos. Together, over 1 month with the same person, that's already a recognizable pattern. One worth noticing before you sign the contract, not after. Every one of the 7 signs coming up isn't theory.
It's a distillation of research from influence psychology, forensic psychology, and fraud detection material, translated into practical, usable tools for the moment.
Why 60 seconds specifically? Because most of these signals show up either in the first minute of meeting someone or in the first minute after you've turned them down or disagreed with them on any point. A manipulator can't hold a mask perfectly for long. The cracks show up exactly at the moments of first contact and first resistance, because those are the moments where they have the least prepared script to fall back on. Listen to every sign that follows with the same question in mind. Has this happened to me at least once in the last month? And with whom? One more nuance before we get into the signs themselves. The 60-second rule doesn't mean you can render a final verdict on someone in 1 minute of conversation.
It means something different. That the first minute is usually informative enough to tell you whether it's worth paying closer attention on future meetings. It's not a snap judgment. It's a look closer signal, one that will either get confirmed or fade away the more you see that person. Before we start, it's worth understanding what all 7 signs have in common. Each one is a situation where a manipulator either has to act without a prepared script or has to consciously control behavior that would otherwise be automatic. A first meeting, the moment of a refusal, a conversation about the past, how someone treats a person with no power over them. These are all points where the mask takes more effort to hold. That's exactly why all 7 signs are grouped around these clear, easy-to-recognize moments, rather than around broad personality traits that are hard to catch in practice. Sign 1. Artificially accelerated closeness. Healthy trust builds gradually. A manipulator often tries to speed it up, artificially creating the feeling that you've known each other forever in a single conversation. Picture the scene. You met 20 minutes ago at an event. The other person suddenly says, "You know, I don't usually open up like this, but with you I feel like I can be real." Or, "You and I clearly have a special connection. I meet people like you maybe once every few years." It sounds like a compliment. In reality, it's both a test and a hook. The test: how will you react to forced closeness? Will you accept it uncritically or hold your distance? The hook: if you accept it, a thought is already planted in your head. This person is special. Different rules apply here. How to check it. Ask yourself, how many real, verifiable facts do I actually know about this person beyond what they've told me about themselves? Healthy closeness grows alongside shared experience. Forced closeness
grows alongside pretty words about the closeness itself. Green flag for comparison. Someone who's genuinely interested in you usually asks more questions about you than they make grand statements about your connection. There's a second, slightly more hidden version of this same sign, a forced us against everyone else. That's when someone you've known for a few days suddenly says, "Most people around me are shallow, but you're clearly not like them." At first glance, that's a compliment. In practice, it's the first brick of future isolation. You're being quietly separated from everyone else before you've had any reason not to trust them. Sign 2. The small boundary test. This might be the most underrated signal of all.
In the first minutes or hours of meeting someone, a manipulator will almost always test one small minor boundary. Not a big one, a small one, because a small one is easier to explain away if they get caught. Example: you agreed to meet at 7. The person shows up 20 minutes late, no warning, no apology, or with an apology so casual it feels more like a formality. Or, you mentioned you don't drink, and half an hour later they're jokingly, but insistently, topping off your glass anyway. Being late by itself proves nothing. It happens to everyone. The real diagnostic isn't the fact itself. It's the reaction to your reaction. If you gently point it out, "Hey, next time just text me if you're running late," a healthy person either apologizes sincerely or offers a mild excuse, but they hear you. A manipulator is more likely to either dismiss your comment, "Come on, it was only 20 minutes," or flip the blame back onto you. "You're being way too sensitive about this." This is a small-scale rehearsal for a much bigger boundary violation down the road. Just run on a safe, low-stakes bet at a moment where you feel awkward making it into a whole issue. Why does this work on small boundaries and not big ones? Because a big violation would immediately trigger alarm and break contact, but a small one is much easier to rationalize to yourself. "I'm probably just being picky. Nothing terrible happened, really." Every one of these small things, left without a clear reaction, quietly shifts your own bar for what feels acceptable, and the next small boundary gets crossed just a little more easily than the last one. Sign 3. The reaction to your no. This is possibly the single most reliable of all 7 signs, because it's almost impossible to fake convincingly. Say no to someone over anything small. You don't want to go somewhere in particular. You're not ready to discuss a personal matter. You can't lend them anything. Listen closely not to the first reaction, but to the second attempt. What happens when no doesn't work the first time? A healthy person faced with a refusal might feel a little disappointed, might even ask why, but ultimately accepts the boundary. A manipulator more often runs one of 3 scripts. Pressure by repetition, repeating the request in different phrasing as if you simply didn't understand the question. Pressure by guilt, after everything I've done for you. Or pressure by silence, a pointed coldness, punishing you for the simple fact of saying no. The check is simple. If I said no to this person right now, what happens to the temperature in the room? Stays the same. Good sign. Drops sharply
or psychological pressure kicks in, a signal worth remembering. It's worth watching for a fourth, less obvious reaction to refusal, too. Instant agreement paired with theatrical hurt. That's when someone says, "Fine, whatever you say," in a pointedly flat voice, their whole demeanor broadcasting that they've resigned themselves to an injustice. Technically, no boundary got crossed, but an emotional bill for your no still gets issued, just without a single direct word of pressure. Sign 4. Words don't match microactions. Manipulators usually talk beautifully about values, honesty, loyalty, caring for the people close to them. The problem isn't the words. It's the gap between the words and the small, easy-to-miss actions that are supposed to back them up. Example: someone spends a long time telling you how much they value honesty above all else, and 5 minutes later proudly describes how cleverly they scammed a vendor at the market or manipulated a co-worker for their own benefit, framing it as a funny story about their own cleverness. An even more telling version of this: how someone treats people who genuinely have no power over the situation. Waiters, junior staff, strangers. Public politeness toward you, paired with irritation or contempt toward someone who can't push back, is one of the most reliable predictors on this entire list, precisely because those are the situations where a person has the least motivation to keep up appearances. There's a simple, practical rule worth taking away from this section. How someone treats a waiter, a rideshare driver, or a delivery courier almost always predicts their future behavior toward you more accurately than how they're treating you right now, at the stage where it's still in their interest to make a good impression. Sign 5. How they talk about their exes. Ask someone about a past serious relationship, a former boss, or a former best friend. Listen not to the fact that they're being critical. Criticizing a past relationship is completely normal, but to the uniformity and completeness of the blame. A red flag sounds like, "All my exes turned out to be crazy. My last boss was impossible to work with, totally toxic. My ex-friend just used me, zero gratitude." If every single past story has exactly one villain, and the narrator is consistently the victim of circumstance, that's a statistically unlikely picture of the world. Most people, across different relationships, end up playing different roles. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. This is a warning sign, not because a manipulator necessarily lies about the facts. It's because they consistently edit the story so responsibility never touches them. And sooner or later, you'll become the next character in that same story, just cast in the role of the new, toxic person. A useful check-in question. Ask the person to name at least one thing they were wrong about in a past relationship. Not an accusation, genuine self-reflection. A healthy person usually finds an example without much trouble, sometimes even with self-deprecating humor. A manipulator in that moment will often either dodge a direct answer or spin their own mistake into more proof of how patient and forgiving they were toward an impossible partner. Sign 6. Artificial urgency. Healthy decisions can survive a pause. Manipulative pressure almost always tries to eliminate your time to think. It sounds like, Answer me right now, or I'll assume you're not interested. I don't have time to wait while you think it over. Either agree now or forget it. Urgency can attach itself to anything: a joint business venture, a romantic step, a financial decision, even a simple favor. The test is simple. Name any reasonable delay, "Let me think about it until tomorrow," and watch the reaction. Legitimate urgency can survive a calm explanation of why it matters right now. Artificial urgency reacts with irritation, escalating pressure, or a fresh dose of emotional argument. Anything to keep you from stepping out of the room and thinking on your own. The mechanism here is simple and well studied in decision-making psychology. Under time pressure, people systematically get worse at noticing contradictions and inconsistencies in the story they're being told. That's exactly why scammers, pyramid scheme recruiters, and manipulators in personal relationships lean on some version of the same phrase so often. There's no more time to think about it. That's not a coincidence. It's a working tool that degrades the quality of your decision at the exact moment your decision matters most. Sign 7. Warmth that switches on and off like a switch. The last one, and possibly the most emotionally confusing, because it's not a constant negative, it's an oscillation. Notice whether this person's warmth and attention track your agreeableness. As long as you're agreeing, supporting, praising, they're warm, generous with attention, charming. The moment you push back, criticize, or are simply less available, the warmth visibly cools, and it cools fast and noticeably, not gradually the way it does with an ordinary person having a bad day. This is warmth on a schedule. It's not really about emotion, it's about conditioning. You're being quietly trained to understand that access to this person's warmth is tied directly to your compliance, not to any genuine relational dynamic. Over time, this creates a particularly insidious effect. You start feeling relief and joy every time the warmth comes back after a cold stretch. And that relief is easy to mistake for love or real closeness, even though it's really just a normal physiological stress relief response, one that wouldn't exist at all if the warmth hadn't been switched off in the first place. And a bonus 8th sign, one that isn't part of the core 7 because it takes a bit more time to check, but is one of the most reliable if you get the chance to apply it. Ask someone to tell you the same story about themselves twice, a few weeks apart. Why they left their last job, say, or why a past relationship ended. A healthy person will generally reproduce the same key facts, even if the wording changes. A manipulator will often unconsciously change details. One time they decided to leave, the next time they were nearly fired. One time the breakup was mutual, the next time they were the one abandoned for no reason. It's not that the person is deliberately lying with every retelling. More often, the story reshapes itself around whatever impression is most advantageous in that particular moment. And that kind of flexibility with facts gives away the pattern far more clearly than any single detail ever could. Most modern communication doesn't happen face-to-face. It happens in messaging apps, and all 7 signs translate into text, just in a slightly different shape. Forced closeness in texting looks like a flood of deeply personal messages on the very first day of knowing someone. The volume of disclosure that would normally take weeks compressed into one evening. The small boundary test might be a phone call at an inconvenient hour with no warning, and when you ask them not to do that, a curt, "You're taking this way too seriously." The reaction to no is especially easy to spot in text through one specific detail: the number of messages sent in a row without your reply. A healthy person met with a refusal sends one message and waits. A manipulator will often send 3, 5, 7 messages in a row, each one slightly more insistent than the last before getting any response at all. Artificial urgency in text shows up as messages timed to your online status, demanding you respond right now, ideally paired with, "I can see you read this and you're not answering." And warmth on a switch is easiest to spot in the speed and length of replies. Fast, warm, full of emoji while you're agreeable. One-word answers with a multi-hour delay and no explanation the moment you push back.
A useful habit. If the overall tone of a conversation over the course of a week feels like an emotional roller coaster rather than a steady line, that's already reason enough to run the full checklist deliberately rather than relying on a vague overall impression. It's sometimes worth, literally, scrolling back a month of messages with a particular person and honestly asking yourself one question. If I were reading this conversation as an outside observer instead of a participant, what would jump out at me first? Patterns are almost always easier to see from the outside than from inside your own emotions in the moment. Knowing the list is one thing. Hearing the sign live in the middle of an ordinary, unremarkable conversation is something else entirely. The difference between people who watch this video and forget it and people who actually start noticing these patterns in real life usually comes down to whether they got any practice recognizing it right away while the information is still fresh. So before we wrap up, let's practice together. 3 short scenes. Each one contains at least one of the signs we've already covered. Try to identify which one before I give the answer. Feel free to pause the video for a few seconds and think it through out loud. Scene 1. A job interview. The future manager says, "If you're coming on board, decide now. I've got 3 more candidates this week. There's no time to wait for you to think it over, even though I can see you're a better fit than the rest." That's sign 6. Artificial urgency reinforced with a light compliment to make it harder to refuse rationally. Scene 2. A new acquaintance, 3rd time meeting. You politely decline the idea of lending a large sum of money to a shared project. They respond, "Strange. I thought you and I had something special. I don't usually trust people that easily. I guess I was wrong." There are 2 signs here at once. Sign 1, forced closeness, now used retroactively as a pressure tool. And sign 3, guilt pressure in response to your no. Scene 3. You've been friends for 3 months. In passing, you mentioned that a mutual acquaintance seems like a fine, ordinary person. The other person's expression instantly changes. "It's strange that you'd think that. Honestly, he treated me terribly, like pretty much all my former friends have. People rarely appreciate what I do for them." That's sign 5, a consistent, "I'm always the victim, everyone else is to blame" pattern, delivered not as a complaint, but in passing, as if it were simply an obvious fact. If you caught at least 2 out of 3, Congratulations. Your radar is already working better than you thought it did before this video. Before we wrap up, an honest warning. A single sign out of 7 noticed once does not make someone a manipulator. Everyone has bad days, awkward jokes, moments of selfishness. That's part of what makes us human, not automatic proof of bad intent. This isn't about a single episode. It's about a pattern. Whether the same behavior repeats over and over, regardless of context, and whether responsibility for the tension in the relationship somehow never quite lands on that person. One friend showing up late to a meeting is just a person. Someone who has a new, perfectly valid excuse every single month for not hearing your no, that's already a pattern. And one more thing. If listening to this list, you suddenly recognized not someone else, but yourself, that's normal too. Most people use one or two of these patterns unconsciously from time to time, out of anxiety rather than bad intent. The difference between an ordinary person and a manipulator isn't whether these traits exist. It's the frequency, the self-awareness, and the willingness to change when someone points it out. There's an opposite trap worth being honest about, too. After videos like this one, some people go through a phase of hypervigilance. You start hunting for these 7 signs in every single conversation, even where they don't exist. And that doesn't do your relationships any favors either. This tool works best not as a constant background interrogation of everyone around you, but as a quick check in moments when your intuition has already raised a flag, that same uncomfortable feeling from the start of this video. It's a filter for doubt that's already there, not a reason to manufacture doubt out of nothing. A good practical anchor here is the rule of 3 meetings. If one of these signs shows up once across 3 meetings with someone, probably a coincidence or just a bad day. If the same sign shows up in every one of 3 meetings in a row, that's statistics, not coincidence, and it deserves more serious attention. A direct conversation or, if needed, some distance. 7 signs worth keeping in the back of your mind at any new meeting and in any conflict. Artificially accelerated closeness, the small boundary test, the reaction to your no, the gap between words and microactions, how someone talks about their exes, artificial urgency, and warmth that switches on and off like a button. Plus the bonus 8th, a story that changes with every retelling. On their own, these are just observations. Repeated over and over with the same person, they stop being a coincidence. It helps to keep this list somewhere other than just your head, literally saved in your phone's Notes app, for example. Not to pull out mid-conversation, but so that in the evening, if that same uncomfortable feeling from the start of this video shows up again, you can calmly check it against specific points instead of relying only on a vague sense of unease that's easy to talk yourself out of. Tell me in the comments which of the 8 signs you recognized fastest in someone in your own life. And honestly, if you recognized it in yourself, say that too. That takes a lot more courage, and I'm genuinely curious to read it. If this format, recognition and defense rather than offense, turned out to be more useful to you than the usual how to become ruthless lists, hit like and subscribe. Next week, we'll cover what to do after you've already recognized a manipulator in a close relationship.
because just knowing the signs isn't enough when the person standing in front of you isn't someone you can easily walk away from. Trust that light, uncomfortable feeling after a conversation. It's almost always right, faster than you can find the words for it.